and welcome back to Real Tax Talk. This is Michael Coronado, and I have Ravi Kantha with me this today. Thank you so much for joining me. Pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No, not a
Thank you,
problem.
Michael.
So, thank you. So love to learn a little bit. A little bit more about you, and kind of what can you share with folks about you and your background, what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a luxury real estate broker in New York City. We're in the process of expanding into Florida as well. Uh, I run a team of 15 people at SERHANT, and I've been doing this for about 11 years now. And before that, I was a lawyer for 5 years, 4 years as a prosecutor in the Bronx, and then 1 year doing white collar criminal defense work in Manhattan. And I made the decision to make quite a big change and obviously shifted gears into sales. Best decision I ever made. Never looked back and very happy with it and have learned a ton about real estate investing along the way. Core business is brokerage, luxury assets, but we see people obviously investing. We have developers, investors, people buying condos for rentals, people investing in multifamily. There's so many ways that we cross paths with this, as well as people who are looking to maximize tax efficiency, right? So that's always something that comes up in our business.
Absolutely, and that's interesting. I find that my days sometimes have themes, and today I was talking about sunk cost and your shift right from uh, law school. Right, I mean, put a lot of time and money and effort to go to law school, pass the bar exam, get into
Yeah,
law, and then decide like, well, maybe this doesn't make sense for me. And you made this, not huge shift, but it's a major shift because you had
yeah.
this sunk cost, right? You spent time, money, effort in doing this, and then you saw, well, this really makes more sense. So I find that really interesting about your background. That's amazing.
It's funny you say that. I heard a really good quote yesterday from I forget what I was listening to. It was some podcast where talking about investing and entrepreneurs, and it was like a mindset focused podcast. And one of it was part of it was that the best entrepreneurs um, don't continue down a path stubbornly, right? They don't worry about the sunk cost. They see opportunity and constantly shift towards that. So their ideas and their tactics and their methods will switch constantly, right? They follow success and they try to learn. They learn very quickly from their failures, and they don't continue to fail the same way, right? They'll fail over and over again, but they don't make the same mistakes twice, and they shift gears. And that was a lesson that I had to learn. I think initially I was very hesitant for the reasons you stated, right? It's like, oh, some cost. Like I've spent so much time, effort, and money on this, and family, friends, a lot of people when I was making this decision brought that up. And I chose to frame it differently. Was it's not sunk cost. Like it's giving me this skill set and education and background that my competitors don't have. So how can I apply that? How can I apply all those lessons and all those skills that I learned during the education and work experience? How can I take those from being a lawyer and apply them to being a real estate broker? And I found countless ways to utilize that expertise over the last 11 years.
Absolutely. I'm sure even, I mean, just this idea of, you learn about law and different things, and maybe not just so much that part, but the ability to negotiate and be an intermediary between multiple parties trying to come to an agreement. That's basically what happens in all real estate transactions, right? You're trying to get folks to an agreement that makes sense for both, or that they're both willing to agree to, and kind of proceed and close, right? So that is interesting.
Yeah.
And and so you mentioned luxury real estate, and you also mentioned real estate investment. And you're making a shift now from New York to Florida. How are the markets the same, and how are they different? I guess
In
curious.
terms of New York and Florida, I think you have a lot of overlap and synergy. That's the reason for the expansion, right? Our core business is townhouses and other luxury, apartments, penthouses in New York City. I started my business primarily in Brooklyn Heights and then Cobble Hill, and I've sort of expanded neighborhood by neighborhood. Uh, we're now probably 60% Brooklyn, 40% Manhattan in terms of our revenue breakup. And we have also, um, what we've seen is the same lenders, developers, investors, and clients many of them are either working in or owning in Florida, right? So it's not. I think there's a stereotype that there's a bunch of New Yorkers who are just saying like, oh, f the taxes. I don't want to be here. I just want to be in a state that wants me, or there's this and I guess this resistance, right, to New York, and it seems like politically driven in some sense. There are people who exist like that, but that's sort of a caricature of reality, right? The reality is people live lives in different places now because it's easier to do, right? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was much harder to have dual residence in, be 6 months in one place, 3 months in another, 3 months in another. Today, that's easier than ever because mobile work is easier than ever. And because people, cities like Miami and Dallas and Nashville and Austin. It's like all these cities have emerged with real economies, and financial markets are driving those economies. The real estate markets in those areas have been incredibly strong, and you see more and more of the same faces in different places. And I think being able to take advantage of that, I think one thing Bob Knackel, who's probably the best, most successful commercial broker in New York City, of all time, you know, he said something that resonated with me is that he built a business around territories early on, right? And it
Mhm.
was neighborhood focused. And that's a great way to sort of divide and conquer and ensure that there's no conflict amongst your team members, right? Everyone's responsible for a certain area. Today, he said, based on the shift of technology and how the markets function, asset class is a better way to tackle these things, right? So you have a business in new development, you have a business in townhouse resale, co-op resale, condo resale. And what are this like, the way I looked at it was, do I have the ability to run this business in a different state as long as I have the right people on the ground?
Mhm.
Is there enough synergy and similarity that what we do here is going to work there, right? How much do we have to adjust? How much do we have to pivot? So the similarities in the market are, ultimately it's sales. You're selling real estate, right? It's not, I tell people what we do is in rocket science. It's not complicated. It's just hard because it requires execution repetitively every day. And that's harder to do than people like to admit. But the things that are different are market trends, are, buyer pools for certain neighborhoods, like learning the details, the local nuance in
Mhm.
New York City took me years. And now we're trying to use artificial intelligence and data aggregation to speed that up, right? Can I get to a place where I can accumulate the market knowledge depth that took me 11 years in New York, the old fashioned way? Can I do that in 6 months to a year to 18 months in Florida because of all the new tools we have? Can I get there? And I think so far the answer is yes. We just need to use the technology, put the data together, organize it, and that's how we're able to see these similarities and differences in the markets.
Oh, wow. That's interesting to me. And you mentioned, the townhouses. That's something that's not as prevalent and popular in South Florida. It's
Yeah.
definitely, uh, I don't think they don't realize how we are still. I think folks don't realize how geographically constrained we are between the Everglades and the Atlantic, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't go anywhere else, and so the only way that it's going to happen is going to be more infill. There's a lot of the kind of the not in my backyard. We don't want to see townhouses or more density in the single family areas, but you're seeing more and more of that prevalence throughout. So that I think that one to me really strikes as like a huge difference in terms of
Well, we
like
compare it
asset class.
more. We compare it more to the single family market in Florida, right? Townhouses have a certain association across the country because they imply like townhouse community, whereas in New York City, it's like the row houses, right? The original, and they're popular here because they are the only form of single family living in New York City, right? You can't go buy a spread in the middle of Manhattan. That just doesn't exist. So you buy a big brownstone, or you buy the widest one you can find, or you get two or three of them and put them together, and that's how you get your compound, right? But you're still in row houses and townhouses, and obviously when you get into the details of the architecture, there's different names, but it certainly compares most similarly to single family spreads in Florida. When you're talking about like in Miami specifically, it's Miami Beach, just the Venetians. Like the Venetians specifically reminds me a lot of Manhattan townhouse neighborhoods because it's like lot by lot. They're all really close to each other, even though the lots are pretty big. They're all right next to each other. Like you still kind of live with your neighbors all the time. So that's the similarity with the beachfront and waterfront living in Florida. There's rarely a lot of space between properties, right? If you get that, you're talking like big, like Fisher Island or, like you're talking about the big spreads that are going 50, 60, 70 million plus. But, the normal $15 million houses, like they remind me a lot of city living because you're right on top of your neighbors. Even though you have a lot of, square footage, you're still pretty compact.
Yeah, it's the cost of land. The cost of land drives the density or the overbuilding or building up as much as you can because you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's that's amazing. So you mentioned also about investments and real estate investments. How are you seeing? How are your clients? Are they looking at South Florida as or Florida in general? Sorry, as a place to invest, or are they looking more for kind of either a secondary home or their primary and making and keeping New York as a secondary or vice versa? How
All
are
of the
they?
above. Honestly, I've had people who have relocated entirely for various reasons, whether it's quality of life, family, tax reason. There's a whole host of reasons for everybody. It's all very personal, and that's what I tell people. It's like it's not just people fleeing for taxes. There's a whole like some people just I like warm weather, and now I can finally work down there. Like my whatever my job is, or my firm has an office down there now, so now I want to be there year round or my mother and father are down there. There's so many things that drive this, but I think we're seeing everything. People invest. See people buy condos for part-time usage and like sort of thinking about it as also an investment, but really it's something I'm going to use, and I'm going to, I could always rent it out if I don't use it. We have some of that. A lot of a lot of my clients are on the commercial side, meaning they're either lenders who are making loans, issuing loans on single family spec or condo development or multifamily, or they're developers who are expanding. Some of them have long term experience in Florida, and some of them are brand new to the market. So they're looking to do joint ventures with local developers or builders because Miami is a very insular market. Miami, the buyer pool and the brokerages, the brokers generally, there's a little bit of a lack of trust of outside developers, right? And there's no credibility yet for local building. So you see a lot of developers partnering with established names, whether it's the GC, I think it's Coastal is the big GC down there, right? So you see
Mhm.
people partnering with local partners or they're using local brokers or they're using, whatever it may be. Like they're trying to create or branded residence, which is huge, right? Because branded residence gets you that instant credibility of the brand you're using. Although I think some people would argue justifiably that the branded residence thing in Miami is out of control. But I think you see people, that's how you know so many new builders are entering the marketplace because there's all these attempts to create credibility and build credibility and trust with the buyer pool right away. So a lot of my clients are participating in the market in that from that lens and that actually makes it the easiest possible transition for us because if I have to go focus on resale in Miami, I've now got to go get, if I want 100 listings, that's like 100 clients, right? But if I want to focus on new development first, if I get two or three developers that I can work with, now I've got a great pipeline for the future and you can build resale from that new development pipeline. And in the process, we can onboard local agents who have solid resale businesses from Fort Lauderdale all the way down to Miami, Gables, Key Biscayne, like all the way through that area, and we can build the resale, support them, help them with lead generation while we run a new development business. That's the most effective way for us to cover the market and figure out exactly where our niche should be in each respective area.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you mentioned about the branded towers. That's definitely probably overblown at this point.
Yeah.
I almost feel like Honda's going to come out with a tower next, and I
It's
say that
funny. They
jokingly.
should. They
You know,
should. We need entry level, right? Let's get the Honda
they should.
Accord Tower.
I say that because the is it the Mercedes one that's currently having financial trouble down here? I think that was
That's
the
actually so
yeah.
Serhant, my brokerage, is handling sales there. Um, it was tough for a little while, but they wrote it, they wrote it out, they supported the developer, and now they have their financing. They secured financing to
Oh,
continue
wonderful.
building. So
Okay.
really good news there. And so JDS, the developer, Michael Stern, I know the project's really important to Ryan Serhant, so we've seen that project stabilize now, and they've got some good press. So hopefully they continue on that track. But it's really exciting to see that project continue forward.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Happy to hear that.
Oh,
Yeah, I
always. I
was
mean,
worried. Yeah,
we
I
want
want
everyone to
everyone to
succeed.
succeed. Yeah, I
We
want
want
everyone to.
everything. Nobody wants a building not to get built, right? Like nothing worse than a half complete building or, a stalled project. It's great to see them continue to completion, get people living there, see the neighborhoods, get revitalized and back to being active sources. Especially when you have like Brickell is so fascinating. There's so much building going on. It's an interesting city to just drive and walk around, right? Because you look in terms of the neighborhood itself, you see all these old buildings that look desolate or
Mhm.
abandoned, and then you see these brand new, beautiful buildings. And then there's certain stretches that are just really well done, like master plan, like retail, restaurants, shops, condos, rentals, offices. And then you realize, like, this is going to spread across the whole, across this whole neighborhood. It's just a question of making sure you underwrite properly, making sure you have the right targets on your sales numbers. And that's where, our ability and our data analysis becomes really critical. We like to get involved very early so that people can make informed offers on sites, can plan out their units properly, and can, then when shifting into the sales strategy, can do that. When you're selling 100, 200, 300 units, like there's a lot of planning that goes into how are you going to sell these things? What's your absorption rate going to be? Who is your target buyer pool? What's your unit mix? Like that's a really deep analysis. And I think we're creating the data that allows us to give the best advice on that.
Interesting. And South Florida has had always that engine of like international immigrants, folks who are more looking at secondary homes, and it seems like that's kind of shifted more to that New York market. So it definitely makes sense that this is something where you're kind of positioning. And so when you work with investors, how are they looking at this from a uh, do they ever look do you work with them in terms of what is your tax strategy at the outcome of this, right? Because if you don't know what your tax liability is going to be at the end of it, it may not make as much sense, right?
Oh
Is that
yeah.
something where a lot of your work or some of your work goes towards?
Yeah, well, I think for brokers and developers, a lot will qualify as a real estate professional, right? That's one component. I think anyone who owns and operates real estate, as rentals, always should be looking into that, talking to a tax professional to get advice on that, because that can change how you invest, right? And it's not because you invest in a deal just for a tax break, which is like I tell people, it's like, one, you can't say that. Like you see that in like a deck that goes out from someone. It's like, we're trying to reduce our taxes. Like, don't, no, that's not how this works. Totally, like,
Yeah,
no. But what you do is you look for tax efficient assets, right? Like, where can I get bonus depreciation? Where in my life can I utilize, can I utilize section 179? Can I do all these things that just are tax efficient? They make sense, and there are ways to legitimately offset some of the other income that you have to pay taxes on, right? It's like, what can I do that gives me the opportunity to have the most tax efficient use of my capital that we're going to invest, right? So I look at, different asset classes over the years. I've looked at car washes, gas stations, I've invested into funds doing that. Those have been successful. They're not really great for cash flow though. So it's just a question of finding that balance, right? You want to find the assets that are good for cash flow. And we work with accountants on things like, should we be doing cost segregation on our multifamily assets, or how do we go about doing that? How aggressive are you supposed to be when you do that, right? Like you want to make sure that you play within the lines, but you also don't want to leave money out there. So it's just a question of finding that balance. I found that like working with a good accountant is extremely important, because I very quickly got outside my depth like of knowledge fast, right? It's like you start looking at all the different things you can invest in, and it gets really complicated really quickly.
Absolutely, and you touched on a lot of things, but particular cost segregation studies. It amazes me. I think you talk about working with a good accountant. Well, you got to work with someone who knows and understands real estate. Is just because they have three little letters behind their name doesn't mean that they actually know and understand what are the different levers you could pull. But there's the opportunity as well for cost segregation, and the same thing, right? It's not just about how aggressive you want to be, but do you need to do that? Is this now the time that you want to actually accelerate that depreciation and bring it forward? And that's a part of the strategy. I think that's really the long term. Whether you
That's a
have,
great
yeah,
point, right? Is like long term strategy, one, understanding the nuance, and two, understanding the application of long term strategy for like, what are you invested in today? What's your income this year? Where's your income coming from? Like, what sources? How is it classified? Right? Is it 1099? Is it K
yep,
ones? Do you have some W-2 income? Like, what is the breakdown here?
yep.
And figuring out like when to take advantage of some of these strategies. That's something that I think is super valuable that people miss. And most accountants don't even touch on that, right? That's a really complicated analysis.
And I think, and that's actually true. And just because you could do a cost segregation study and bonus doesn't mean you have to do it or should do it. There's the opportunity to wait
Right.
for for the right time when you sell that next asset to be able to take care of that bonus depreciation, and offset that sale potentially, right? And so I think there's something to be said about that. So it's all about having the right partners. And Ravi,
Agreed.
it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I don't know if you had anything else you'd like to share. That I know I asked you a lot about your background
No,
and
this is
things.
great. I really enjoyed it, Michael. Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity. And it was great chatting with you.
Same here.